James had always been the type of man who believed financial success could fill any void. A billionaire at 55, he built an empire with his own hands, but his personal life lay in ruins. His wife's death, years ago, left a deep hole in his heart. The silence in the large house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoed his loneliness. And even with so much money, nothing could fill the emptiness that the lack of genuine connections left. As his health deteriorated, James withdrew further from everyone. The fortune that was meant to be a symbol of achievement increasingly became a barrier between him and any hope of finding peace. He was surrounded by lawyers, doctors, and a stepson who couldn't hide his interest in the inheritance. Outwardly, the world saw a powerful man. Inwardly, James felt purposeless, waiting for the inevitable end. He spent his days reflecting on the decisions that led him here, sacrifices made for his career, moments he could have shared with his wife but didn't. The house, once full of promise, now felt like a prison. What was a monumental accomplishment to the world had become an unbearable burden for him. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional one. He knew he didn't have much time left, but more than that, he knew he would die alone. James never imagined he would spend his last days like this. The empire he had built seemed more like a monument to isolation than to success. As illness weakened him, he began to question if any of it had truly been worth it. But still, something within him resisted. Something kept him searching for an answer, a relief. And it was at this point that the idea of hiring a caregiver came into his mind, as a last attempt to bring some form of comfort. In this context of emptiness and regret, Emily entered his life. She wasn't just another professional, she was the key to a change James didn't even expect. Though he didn't know it at the time, Emily's arrival would change everything. Something within him, perhaps the last shred of hope, saw in her a chance for redemption. And so, he made the call that would alter the course of his remaining days. Emily, a young caregiver, answered James's call without knowing what she was getting herself into. She saw only a job that could pay her bills and ease her financial concerns. But stepping into that house and seeing the man she was to care for, something inside her shifted. James wasn't what she expected, and the coldness of the environment made her hesitate. She didn't know if she could handle what lay ahead. But, like him, Emily had her own wounds, and something kept her there. James's first impression was that of a man fragile, both physically and emotionally. He didn't seem like the confident, imposing billionaire she had imagined. On the contrary, he was someone who needed more than medical care. He needed a connection. And though Emily didn't realize it at the time, she was the right person to offer exactly that. There was tension in the air, not just because of James's health but also due to Adam's presence, the stepson. Gradually, Emily noticed the complicated dynamics in the house. Adam was clearly unconcerned about his stepfather's health. His focus lay elsewhere, and that bothered her. Yet she stayed. Something about the situation made her feel that her presence was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable. And James, for his part, began to realize that Emily wasn't just another caregiver. There was something in her he couldn't ignore. As the days went by, the distance between James and Emily began to shrink. She, who initially saw it as a temporary job, began to feel there was something deeper in their relationship. Maybe it was James's gaze, loaded with a sadness she recognized. Or maybe it was the fact that he, despite everything, still sought some form of redemption. And thus, a journey that started with loneliness and hopelessness began to gain new meaning for both. Emily, when she took the job, didn't know she was entering a story far bigger than she imagined. At first, everything seemed simple. Take care of James, ensure he was comfortable, and follow the medical instructions. But as the days passed, she felt something was different. James wasn't just a frail, lonely man. There was a greater void, an invisible weight he carried that, in some way, resonated within her as well. James, on the other hand, slowly began to open up. Something about Emily's presence made him feel less vulnerable, less exposed to his own fragility. He observed her carefully, noting her dedication but also what she hid behind her shy smile. There was a similarity in their pains, an echo of loneliness, and that intrigued him. He felt she was there for more than just a job, though neither of them fully understood what that meant. As the days passed, James made an unexpected request. He didn't want Emily to be just his caregiver. He wanted her to stay by his side in a different way, almost like a daughter. The idea surprised him as much as it did her. But deep down, James knew this was his last chance to fill the emptiness that had always haunted him. He hired her not only to care for his frail body but to try and heal his soul. His request moved Emily, who had never expected such closeness. Emily found herself facing a dilemma. Accepting this role meant crossing an invisible line between the professional and the personal, something she had never considered before. But when she looked at James, she saw more than a rich, sick man. She saw someone desperate for connection, someone who needed more than medical care. And perhaps, somehow, she needed that connection too. Maybe this job was more than just a way to earn money. Maybe it was a chance to discover something about herself as well. The idea of being treated as the daughter of a man she barely knew was unsettling for Emily, but she couldn't refuse. There was something in James's eyes, a silent plea she couldn't ignore. He needed someone by his side, and suddenly she realized that, in some way, she needed him too. The emptiness they both felt began to intertwine, creating an invisible but powerful bond. And thus, without realizing it, Emily accepted the call to the adventure that would change their lives forever. James felt a subtle relief upon realizing that Emily hadn't rejected his offer. There was something about this young woman that made him feel he wasn't completely lost. He began to share stories of his life with her, stories he had never told anyone. And slowly, a deeper connection formed between them. Emily, in turn, began to see James not as a boss or a patient but as someone she could also open up to. Despite his weakened state, James began to reveal himself as an unexpected figure of wisdom for Emily. He, who was on the brink of death, found moments of clarity in which he shared reflections on life, regrets, and the mistakes that led him to distance himself from everything that truly mattered. In conversations that arose amid the silence of the house, he spoke about missed opportunities, about time that doesn't come back, and the price he paid for dedicating himself so much to work. And, unknowingly, James became Emily's mentor, offering her something no one else had, a perspective on what truly matters. Emily, accustomed to thinking her life was a series of unsolvable problems, began to listen to James more attentively. He was a man who had achieved everything she could dream of: success, money, power. But seeing how he regretted his choices, she began to question her own priorities. James's words, often simple and laden with regret, touched her heart and made her reflect on the path she was following. In a subtle way, he challenged her to think about what she was truly seeking in life. Among their conversations, James began to tell stories about his wife, someone he clearly loved deeply but with whom he had failed to spend more time. "I built castles but neglected the garden," he would say, with a sadness that cut to Emily's heart. It was as if he was, through her, trying to mend the mistakes of the past, attempting to pass on the lessons he learned too late. And, in this process, Emily was not only helping him find peace but also beginning to understand herself better. These conversations became precious moments for both of them. James, in speaking, felt he was leaving an emotional legacy, something money couldn't buy. And Emily, in listening, felt she was receiving something rare, a wisdom of life that no one could teach her in books or on the streets. He encouraged her to follow her own dreams, to avoid making the same mistakes he did. And little by little, Emily began to see James not just as a patient but as a mentor, an unexpected guide in her own journey. Their bond grew stronger. Emily, once hesitant and unsure of her place in that house, began to see that perhaps she had a larger role to play. James, who had started this journey lonely and filled with regrets, began to realize there was still time to find some kind of redemption. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he also knew that, with Emily by his side, he could do something meaningful in the days he had left. And so, the relationship between caregiver and patient transformed into something much deeper. James, in turn, began to offer small pieces of advice to Emily about life. He encouraged her to be brave, to follow her instincts, and not to let fear paralyze her. He saw a strength in her that she couldn't recognize in herself, and he wanted to help her discover that power. Though weakened, James became an inspiring presence for Emily. And without either fully realizing it, they began to change each other. In turn, Emily began to understand that what she offered James was not just physical care but the chance for a real human connection. After listening to James's advice and absorbing his story-filled lessons, Emily decided to commit fully to caring for him, not just as a caregiver but as someone with whom he could share his final moments. She crossed an invisible barrier, accepting that she was connecting emotionally in a way she had never imagined at the start. James was no longer just a lonely billionaire, he was becoming an important figure in her own journey. This acceptance brought a new weight to her life but also a sense of purpose. From that moment on, James's mansion, once cold and desolate, began to hold new meanings for Emily. She learned to handle the routine, not only the medical care but also the delicate emotional dance involved in being by the side of a man in his last days. In crossing this threshold, she committed herself wholly to being there for James, even knowing that goodbye was inevitable. The bond that began to bloom between them wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, both for him and for her. However, this new commitment brought with it a series of challenges. The tension with Adam, James's stepson, only grew. Adam saw the growing relationship between James and Emily as a threat to his own interests. He couldn't hide his frustration seeing his stepfather give more attention to the caregiver than to him. And for Emily, every interaction with Adam was a silent battle. She knew he didn't care about James's well-being, and that made her want to protect him even more. With each passing day, Emily faced an environment that, despite its luxury, was full of disputes and distrust. Adam continued to pressure James, suggesting he should sign documents and resolve inheritance matters once and for all. James resisted, increasingly convinced that the true legacy he could leave behind wasn't in his assets but in the human connection he was beginning to build with Emily. And this placed Emily at the center of a battle she hadn't asked to be a part of. By accepting her new role at James's side, Emily knew she was entering unknown territory. She was no longer just the hired caregiver but someone who needed to protect the emotional legacy of a man who had wasted much of his life chasing material success. In crossing this threshold, Emily began to understand that what was at stake wasn't just James's health but also what he would leave to the world, and to her. This crossing of boundaries led her down a path of tough decisions, where her courage and loyalty would be tested. Despite Adam's suspicious looks, Emily stood firm. Every time she cared for James, she felt she was doing something greater than just her job. She was helping a man find peace in his final days. And at the same time, she began to find something within herself, a strength she had never noticed before. The world of luxury and family conflicts around her became merely the backdrop for a much deeper emotional journey. And now, there was no turning back. As time passed, the tests Emily faced became increasingly difficult. Though James was emotionally closer to her, he grew weaker each day. His health crises increased, and Emily often found herself in situations where she had to make quick and difficult decisions. However, the biggest challenge came from Adam, who, now more than ever, pressured to secure his inheritance. Emily felt each of his visits was a trap disguised as concern. The tension between them was palpable, and Emily knew she needed to stay alert. But Emily wasn't alone in this journey. Sarah, James's trusted lawyer, began to notice the true nature of Adam's intentions. She became an unlikely ally for Emily. Sarah didn't trust Adam, and as James's lawyer for many years, she knew what he truly wanted for his legacy. Together, Emily and Sarah devised plans to protect James, not only from Adam but from any other threat that might arise. This support gave Emily the confidence needed to continue fighting for what she believed in. Each of Adam's visits was a test of patience and emotional strength for Emily. He insinuated that she shouldn't be so involved with James, trying to make her feel guilty or out of place. However, the growing closeness between her and James gave her the strength not to yield to manipulation. Adam represented everything James despised: greed and the desire to control something he hadn't helped build. And because of this, Emily felt even more determined to protect James from any decision he might be forced to make in a moment of weakness. Despite all the challenges, James and Emily grew closer. He began to trust her in a way he had never trusted anyone, not even his wife. Emily was a constant presence, bringing him peace amid the chaos his life had become. He opened up to her in ways that made her realize that, more than a caregiver, she had become a crucial part of James's life. Even with his health deteriorating, he felt more at peace with Emily by his side. Adam, however, didn't give up. He knew time was running out, both for James and his inheritance. He tried to force James to sign documents, often showing up unannounced at the house, always with a different excuse. Emily felt the tension grow each day and knew that something more serious could happen. Her mission now went beyond caring for James physically. She needed to be the protector of his final wishes, while Sarah, behind the scenes, prepared to act legally if necessary. With time running out quickly, James increasingly felt the weight of his life choices. He approached Emily with an unexpected proposal, one that touched deeply on his most guarded emotions. "I always wanted to have a daughter," he told her one quiet evening, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Emily remained silent for a moment, surprised and moved. James continued, explaining he had never had the chance to be a father and that now, in his last moments, he wanted her to treat him as such. It was as if he was finally opening the doors to his soul, revealing his desire for a connection he never had. This revelation profoundly moved Emily. She had accepted the role of caregiver, but now, James was asking for something far greater. She would be, in his final days, the daughter he never had, the only person who could bring him some emotional comfort. Upon hearing this, Emily realized she also felt a similar emptiness, as if something was missing in her own life. Perhaps, in that unlikely encounter, they could both fill these emotional gaps. James, the billionaire man, so distant from a normal life, was now becoming someone deeply human to her. James's proposal touched Emily in ways she never imagined. Emily, who had always kept her own pain hidden, began to realize that somehow this relationship with James was awakening feelings she didn't even know existed. There was indeed a connection growing between them. And despite the initial strangeness of his request, she realized it could be an opportunity to offer something genuine to someone who always felt isolated, both in wealth and illness. James's request was more than a desire for companionship, it was a desire for redemption. Now, Emily found herself in an even greater dilemma. She could continue to be the professional caregiver, maintaining a certain emotional distance, or she could cross a line that would transform everything. James's request put her face to face with her own unresolved issues. By accepting this symbolic role as his daughter, she would be opening her heart in a way she had never done before. She knew that if she did, she would be completely vulnerable to the intense emotions that would come, both the good and the painful. As James grew weaker, the bond between the two strengthened. Every conversation, every simple gesture, like holding his hand during a pain crisis, held deep meaning. For James, Emily represented a last chance to feel what it was like to be a father, to experience a love he always wanted but never had. And for Emily, James's presence gave her something she had never found, a sense of belonging, a family, even if temporary. She was slowly accepting that her role in James's life was more than just caring for his body, it was caring for his heart. Now, with James's health rapidly deteriorating, Emily knew time was against them. She felt the urgency in his gestures, in the words he said, and knew every moment was precious. They were, indeed, approaching an emotional cave, where the truth would be painfully but necessarily revealed. And with this closeness, both Emily and James began to understand that their lives, once disconnected, were about to change forever. James's health worsened rapidly. The days when he could get out of bed became rare, and Emily was constantly by his side, trying to balance medication and the comfort he so desperately needed. The tension in the house rose, and Adam's presence became increasingly oppressive. He insisted that James finalize the will, pressuring him to sign documents that would secure his share of the inheritance. Emily knew James was vulnerable, but at the same time, he resisted with all his remaining strength, determined not to give in. It was an emotional and physical battle. Emily struggled to keep James stable but also to protect him from Adam, who, insensitive to the situation, seemed to care only about the money. Every day was a trial. James drifted in and out of crises, and Emily found herself, many times, in moments of desperation, trying to calm his breathing, monitoring his vital signs, but also tending to the emotional part, which now weighed more than ever. She knew the end was near, and the pain of that imminence was overwhelming. The situation reached a climax when James had a severe respiratory crisis. Adam was at the house, once again trying to force James to sign the documents, when he collapsed. Emily ran to help him, trying to keep him stable, while Adam insisted that they should take advantage of James's lucidity to resolve legal matters. Emily's anger almost overflowed, but she knew her focus needed to be on James. She remained firm, not allowing Adam to come any closer. It was a moment when she had to make a choice: protect James's dignity above anything else. That night was the hardest yet. James struggled to breathe, and Emily was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She knew she was facing a trial that demanded everything from her. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but she couldn't give up. Even with Adam lurking, Emily kept her promise to James. She would be there as his daughter until his last breath. She held his hand, whispered words of comfort, and tried to offer the peace he so sought. In that dark moment, the bond between them was stronger than ever. Emily had no doubts that she had made the right choice by committing emotionally. She knew that despite the pain and fear of losing James, she had found something valuable in this journey: a genuine love, a connection that transcended blood and biology. But now, she had to face the hardest reality of all. The farewell was near. The final trial was dealing with this impending loss, and she felt that the time to say goodbye was approaching. That night, as Emily held James's hand, he made a revelation that changed everything. With a weak and broken voice, he said something she could never imagine: "You are my daughter." Emily, in shock, was silent for a moment, unable to process what she had just heard. James, with a look of deep sadness and regret, explained that he had recently discovered her existence. He never had the courage to reach out to her, but hiring her as his caregiver was his way of having her close, even if for a short time. Emily's mind whirled. How could this be true? Everything began to make sense. The inexplicable connection she felt with James, his desire to treat her as a daughter, the stories about his regrets. She had been caring for her own father without even knowing it. The revelation hit her with a mix of emotion and sadness. The void she carried regarding her own family now seemed filled in a painful yet gratifying way. She had found her father, even if in his last moments. James, with tears in his eyes, apologized for not telling her sooner. He explained that he was afraid of rejection, afraid she wouldn't want him in her life. But seeing how she cared for him, feeling the bond between them grow, he knew he had to reveal the truth before it was too late. Emily, still in shock, didn't know exactly how to feel. There was anger over so many lost years, but also a deep sense of acceptance. She had always sought a connection, and now, finally, she had it. With this revelation, something changed inside Emily. She was no longer just the hired caregiver, she was James's daughter. The feeling of belonging, which had always eluded her, was now there, real and palpable. And, although she knew their time together was ending, James's presence in her life took on a new dimension. It was an unexpected reward, a truth that brought both pain and healing. She felt that, somehow, their paths had always been destined to cross. James, for his part, seemed to find a peace he had never felt. He knew he didn't have much time, but the fact that he had finally revealed the truth to Emily gave him a sense of relief. Even with the disease consuming his final moments, he knew he had done something important. He had found his daughter, and more than that, he had created with her a connection that transcended lost time. For James, this was his redemption. Now, knowing she was James's biological daughter, Emily felt the weight of the decisions she would have to make in the coming days. The truth about her paternity brought a whirlwind of emotions, but also the clarity that she needed to protect her father's legacy, both emotionally and materially. James, increasingly fragile, had made it clear he didn't want to give in to Adam's pressures, and Emily, with Sarah's support, prepared to face this battle. It was a return to the real world, where concrete decisions had to be made, and she was ready. The following days were a mix of silent farewells and inevitable confrontations. Adam, realizing James wouldn't sign the documents he so insisted on, became more aggressive in his approaches. He made constant visits, pressuring Emily and trying to undermine her confidence. But now, knowing James was her father, Emily felt a greater responsibility. She wasn't just caring for him, she was also protecting what he had built and, above all, his final wish to maintain this genuine connection that had finally been revealed. With James's health worsening each day, Emily and Sarah began to make legal arrangements to ensure James's wishes would be respected after his death. Adam, realizing he was losing control, tried to manipulate the situation in every way possible, but Sarah, always steadfast, was ahead of him at every turn. She had dealt with many greedy heirs before and wouldn't let James's final wishes be destroyed by an act of greed. Emily, for her part, focused on being by James's side in his final moments, knowing every day was precious. The nights beside James became a mix of memories and unspoken farewells. He grew weaker, but in moments, he could still whisper words of love and gratitude to Emily. For her, these moments were a gift, a chance to create memories, even if brief, with the father she never knew she had. There was peace in James's eyes, as if he had finally found what he had spent his life searching for. And Emily, despite the impending sadness, also felt at peace being by his side, living this truth until the end. When James finally passed, the house, once filled with tension, fell into a heavy silence. Emily knew that this was the moment when everything would change. Now, with James's death, she had to deal with the consequences of the legacy he left, both emotional and material. Adam would still try everything to secure his share, but Emily was stronger. She knew that, with Sarah by her side, she would have the means to protect James's inheritance, not just the money, but most importantly, the memory and final wishes of her father. James was gone, but he left a transformation in Emily that she never expected. She now had to face the world in a new way, knowing she was the daughter of a man who, in his last moments, found in her the love he had always sought. The journey back to the real world was just beginning, but Emily was no longer the same person who had entered that mansion in the beginning. She had found her place, and above all, she had found a connection that would transform her forever. Emily returned to the world with a renewed heart and a new purpose. The experience with her father gave her something she never had before: a family, a legacy, and, most importantly, a sense of belonging. She now carried within her the power of family connection, something that healed wounds she didn't even know she had. And more than any material inheritance, this elixir brought her an inner peace that transformed the way she saw life. With James's will resolved and Adam out of the picture, Emily took over the leadership of the philanthropic foundation her father had created years before. She dedicated herself to continuing James's work, but also brought a new perspective to the institution. The lessons she learned throughout her journey made her understand the importance of human connections and genuine care, and she wanted the foundation to reflect these values. Now, the money that was once a symbol of power and isolation would become a means of transforming lives. Emily's leadership at the foundation was met with enthusiasm. The story of her connection with James, revealed publicly after his death, deeply touched people. She came to be seen not just as the heiress of a billionaire but as a woman who, despite her own struggles, found strength and purpose in a relationship she never imagined having. And this elixir, the love she found in James's last days, spread through everything she did. With this new worldview, Emily began to make significant changes in her own life. She reconnected with friends, pursued new projects, and, above all, came to value the small things that once seemed insignificant. The elixir James had given her, the power of human connection, overflowed into every aspect of her life. She was no longer the young caregiver lost in her own difficulties. Now, she was a strong, determined woman deeply connected to her purpose. The challenges didn't disappear, of course. Emily still faced obstacles, both personal and professional, but the difference lay in how she approached them now. The fear that once paralyzed her had been replaced by a quiet confidence, an assurance that, no matter what happened, she had within her the power to transform any situation. This was the true elixir James had given her. Not the financial inheritance, but the recognition of her own strength and worth. And so, Emily continued her life, with the certainty that everything she experienced with James prepared her for this moment. She knew there would be many battles ahead, but now she was ready to face them with a heart full of hope and a renewed soul. James's legacy would live on through her, not just in her work, but in the way she chose to live and love. And so, the story of Emily and James ended with redemption, healing, and a love that transcended the time they had together. Emily, now complete, moved forward knowing that, even in the darkest moments, she had found her strength. The cycle of transformation was complete, and the future, finally, seemed full of possibilities.